Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deserts and Garden podcast. I'm Nathan, and this is my wife Mia.
If you're new here, this is where we share our daily highs and lows. This is not by any means a highlight reel, but where we share the actual realities of navigating marriage, faith, and our life together with God's guidance every step of the way.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about how hurt happens in relationships, but so does healing.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into three different points. Our first point is, pain versus injury, and the idea that not all pain is bad and growth hurts, but it's different than true harm.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk about, change is hard, but it's necessary. And come as you are is biblical, but staying as you are is definitely not. And then we're going to wrap up with, standing strong in the face of guilt tripping and manipulation. And how do you hold firm to your boundaries when people are trying to break them?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about boundaries yesterday and the pain versus injuries. That also comes from the original boundary book. And then the last section, like you said, how do you hold on to boundaries when people are trying to break them? That also comes straight from the boundaries books, which a lot of our topics recently will probably be surrounding boundaries just because that's what we're reading. But this hurt happens in relationship, but so does healing, actually came from True Women. They were talking about how all of the 5 aspects of our life, which includes our social life, that makes up our wholeness. And if we're hurt by a relationship, how that can affect our spiritual life, that can affect our emotional life, our mental life, and our physical life. Like when you break up with like a really close friend, like you do feel that in all those other areas. So just talking about how if you're hurt, you really should not be pulling away and isolating, and how you really need to like make sure that that 5th pillar is still standing strong. And this is a tough one because so many of us have been in situations where boundary settings or like relationships with people, it just feels impossible, especially when there's emotions from 2 different people involved, whether this is a friendship, a family quarrel, or if it's something in your marriage, your relationships. But the scripture is just so clear. Like, we are called to speak the truth in love, and we are also called to guard our hearts. So all that being said at the preface of this episode, just to give you guys a little bit of a snapshot and a preface for what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, True Woman is something our church does for women specifically.
Oh, yeah, it's a conference.
Yeah, it's a conference. It's usually a one-night thing. They come out, it's just a women thing. Like, they come out and they have, like, usually a panel interview.
Well, you were serving, so you also heard the message.
Well, I also heard the message, but that's not, men aren't normally there.
Okay.
Like, unless you're on team and you're serving.
Yeah.
But, like, the idea is, like, they do a North Men and they do a True Women.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, is make sure that you're in a church that has groups. Make sure that you're in a church that has a women's ministry or a men's ministry to kind of speak to you separately as well as collaboratively. I think that's really important. I love that our church does that.
Absolutely. All right, let's get back on topic here. We'll bring something back from the Book of Boundaries, and we're going to talk about, what is the difference between an injury and what is the difference between pain.
Yeah, so I think they dedicated like a whole chapter to this, but essentially pain can be good. So think about when you're working out. Your muscles get sore, that's painful, but that's how they grow. So, growing pains are good, but that's different than an injury. If I have a physical injury, that harms my ability to then continue. So pain is good because that produces perseverance and growth, whereas injury is harm. So that's, a more physical example. And then if you're thinking socially, you can have pain in a relationship from speaking the truth in grace. That could be painful. It could be painful to hear, hard truths. But then injury is like personal attacks.
Yeah, and the Bible's pretty clear about this. In Hebrews 12 it says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful."
Yeah.
Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it.
Yeah, so there, like, it says painful, not harmful or injuryful would be the word there, but it's not harmful, it's painful. So that's why, setting boundaries, like we talked about I guess 2 episodes now, and then we talked about it yesterday, is boundaries can be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but uncomfortable doesn't mean unable. Uncomfortable doesn't mean wrong. Just because someone doesn't like your boundary doesn't mean you're hurting them or you're harming them. It just means that there needs to be an adjustment. There
Yeah.
needs to be some give and take in that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is, I feel like, where a lot of people struggle.
Yeah.
You know, we love the idea, specifically, like, come as you are. But God never really intended us for to stay exactly where we are.
Yeah, we're made to move. It's a
Yeah.
journey. And like in Romans 12:2, that's the verse in my bio. It says, "Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds." And transformation is not comfortable. Transformation is an uncomfortable process. When you're transforming into something new, that's not easy. So yeah, I mean, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Like I said, episode 22, if you guys want to go back and listen to the episode where we talked about how uncomfortable doesn't mean you're unable.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it applies to relationships. It applies to, growth in marriage, friendships. Growth requires change. Mm-hmm. And change often means resistance.
Yeah. I mean, when you and I had to adjust, like, with how we handled our conflict, it wasn't easy.
Oh, no.
To just stop certain habits, but staying the same would have been worse. And I feel like we talked about this in the past, like your upbringing versus my upbringing, and where I was raised by more of like the feisty, fiery Latina, and like how that could like come out in the way that I behave, like
Yeah.
with the, like my mom was 100% the type to like, if you're acting crazy, like I'm just gonna throw away all the dishes. I think I said that in like a couple episodes back, is like,
I think we just
that's
talked about this last
probably
episode.
what I would do.
Yeah.
But it's also like, now that I'm thinking about it, I would say something like that because that's what I saw. Like,
Yeah.
that's how I grew up. So, like, 100% that's something.
What was the story you told me about, like, what your mom did? She, like, you guys color-coded your dishes? Like,
Oh, because she threw away all the dishes.
Yeah.
So, I have 4 siblings that I primarily grew up, or 3 that I primarily grew up. There's 4 of us. So we all had different colors.
Yeah.
So we had plastic, a cup, and a spoon and fork, and a plate and a bowl. So we all had our own color. And
if you came home and, like, the wrong color
Yeah.
was not clean,
yeah, then
is
you
it?
would know whose it was.
knows who it was, and that's because, like you said, she threw away all the dishes because
Yeah.
she was tired of the mess.
That didn't work for long though, because then my siblings just started just using whatever color. But that was a whole thing. Fun. Love reminiscing.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is time.
Yeah, but, that's honestly, we're kind of like, an example of, like, a good place where boundary would have came in. You don't set them because you don't love someone. You
Yeah.
set them because you do.
Yeah.
Like, specifically, like, when it comes to cleaning, like, the idea of, maybe it was a bit of an overreaction throwing away all the plates.
It was a little wild, but in
Yeah.
hindsight, as a parent, I could totally see color coding and saying like, "Hey, this is your plate, child.
Yeah. You're
This
responsible
is your
for it.
responsibility." Like, I can see the mentality.
Oh, absolutely.
behind
I'm not
it.
saying it's wrong, like, by any stretch of the imagination. I actually think that's actually a good idea. But,
Thanks, Ange.
yeah. Shout out here.
You might use that.
Yeah.
All right, we gotta get back on topic.
Yes,
What are we talking about?
We're going into section 3. Why boundaries, like, don't exist in a vacuum.
Oh, yes. You need community. So if you set a boundary, expect resistance. That's what you had just said. So expect resistance, especially from people who have benefited from your lack of boundaries before.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Like, if someone has always been able to guilt trip you, yell at you, in a moment you're going to start saying no. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be like, oh, you said no? Okay, everything's fine now.
Congratulations!
Yeah, you have boundaries.
Boundaries.
Clap and walk away. Like,
Ain't
they're going to
gonna
say, what? Like, they're going to snap out. They're going to resist that boundary.
Definitely going to be some pushback, maybe even some trash talking, some ganging up on you might happen,
Yeah.
or, they might try and make you feel like you're selfish, but that's why when you start having boundaries, you really need a community. That's what we mean by boundaries don't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You need a community of people that are going to support you when the people that you're trying to establish boundaries with are, like, mentally and emotionally and or physically, like those other four pillars become affected when you're trying to stand up for your social pillar: the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the mental. I think I said mental like 4 times.
Yeah, I said mental a lot. But you're not wrong in that. Like, one thing I learned from therapy was, at one point, if whatever you're doing served you, whether it was, if yelling at maybe your mom or your sibling, like, produced a result that was, pleasurable to you, or that, got an outcome that you were seeking.
Yeah.
It served you, and you're going to continue doing that because it served you one time. It's like that neurological pathway that's now engraved into your brain.
Yeah. Like,
you're going to keep doing it over and over and over again because it served you one time. It works. So therefore, it's gotta work.
And it's hard to break
absolutely. But in Ecclesiastes 4, it says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and the cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And back to what you were just saying, like, we need godly community to remind us that, setting a boundary is biblical, and, setting that boundary is the right thing to do.
Yeah, right. So if you're dealing with this, like, emotional, mental manipulation, like, just know you're not crazy for protecting your peace. Like, there's a difference between enduring trials for growth and just staying in situations where someone is constantly harming you. So that's kind of like what we were saying before. There's a difference between painful growth and harm. Like, if somebody is mentally, emotionally, and spiritually harming you, that's where, sometimes it is better to say, okay, we need to take a pause, we need to take a beat. Like, I need to get into a small group, especially, like, for me, getting into my wives' crew. I now have 3, like, really great Christian wives who I could, like, we are in a group chat. I can reach out to them, ask them for prayer, ask them for guidance. Like, that is something that's so vital to your relationship because they also can, like, set you straight and just remind you, like, hey, trust in God. Like, so often it'll be like, hey, I'm stressing about this. I'm worried about this. And they'll be like, hey, like, remember God is good.
And let's be real, like, sometimes, like, the hardest boundaries to keep are with family.
Oof, yes, because guilt tripping hits different when it's coming from the people who raised you or the people that you grew up with.
Yeah, but, honoring your parents doesn't mean enabling unhealthy behavior.
Yeah.
Jesus himself set boundaries with people, even his own family at times. You look at Matthew, 12.
Yeah. So if you're struggling to make boundaries, maintain boundaries, just really lean on God's wisdom, surround yourself with truth tellers, and remember that discomfort isn't the same as injury. Pain and injury are not the same thing.
And if you had one takeaway from today, let it be this. Boundaries aren't about controlling others. They're about honoring yourself and your relationships.
That's good.
Growth is painful, but it's necessary.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So be sure to leave us a comment, send us a message. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, drop us a review. It really helps us to continue making content that serves you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Deserts and Garden podcast. Until next time, walk in love,
live with purpose,
and trust God in every desert and garden.
See ya.